Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. This is Paul Bass inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. We got two people here who make New Haven tick, and they're going to tell us about how they want to continue doing that for another 2 years. New Haven Alders, Caroline Tanbee Smith and Gary Hogan are in the studio today. They're finishing up their first terms as a city alder, one of those unsung positions where you work endless hours and take a lot of grief for not a lot of money. And they're running for second term. So I'm going to be asking them today why and how they feel about it. Hi, Gary. Hi, Caroline. Thanks so much for coming in.
Hi. Great to be here.
Great to see you guys. I'm going to ask you guys to get so close to that mic you could almost touch it. But so, Gary, you were chosen as Alder for the air. You filled in midterm when Alder Tom Ficklin died in the 28th Ward in Beaver Hills. So you've had like a quick education in the position, even though you watched New Haven politics for a long time. How's that going, and why'd you decide you want to keep going and run for re-election?
Well, first of all, it's only been 6 months. November 25th, I was sworn in, and getting into the seat was a challenge, only because our former alder, Tom Ficklin, had passed away, leaving a void in Ward 28 politics. Having been Ward co-chair and also Ward 28 and Ward 28 champion for all these years. Been in Ward 28 since 1963. Grew up on Carmel Street, Ward 28. Moved to Bellevue Road, Ward 28. Got married at Bethel Church, Ward 28. Raised my kids in Ward 28. Still live in Ward 28.
Is Carmel still Ward 28?
Say again?
Is Carmel Street still in Ward 28?
Yes, it is.
Doesn't that get carved up and out every 10 years?
No, the borders are the boulevard to Whaley Avenue, all the way down to Orchard, turn down left
Crescent.
on Munson.
Okay.
So
it's actually coherent.
I have a unique ward. I have a high school, I have a jail, I have a business district.
For now, you got you.
Yeah, for that.
So Gary, you feel like you're a real neighborhood person, and we have 30 alders in New Haven, which really focuses on neighborhood. You've had a lifetime of activism, presence in your ward, in government. What made you want to step into an elected official role where you're kind of needing to be on call almost all the hours for things neighbors need?
It doesn't feel like I'm on call ever. It feels that I worked through my lifelong and professional experiences and life experiences, that this role kind of fell in place for me. Having sat on the other side of the Board of Aldermen table in a variety of capacities.
Right, you were at Livable City Initiative when you come to ask for them for inspectors,
Authority,
Housing Authority.
Office of Housing Neighborhood Development. And had
OHND, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
That was the precursor
Real
to
estate
Livable
services.
Cities.
Of course, you remember my old guy, Joe DiMatteo. So having all those experiences and then already being a part of the community, there's the Beaver Pond group, there's Webb, there's Hill House.
And that's really Edgewood Beaver Hills
Gale, yes,
Community Management District.
There's all these little organizations, WASD, my Orthodox community. Having been doing that work and working with them for so long, it just seemed like a natural progression.
And how did you feel that being an alder could put those experiences into place?
Well, I always felt my role to bring resources to my neighborhood. First and foremost, there's a lot of issues that come up. Example, crime. My relationship with the police department and their leadership has helped me allow them to come to my home back in October. And then as of last Thursday, we've had an 85% reduction in crime in Beaver Hill section. So I think my relationships and my resources of getting the residents to talk to those that they need to talk to by bringing, as an alder now, having a different set of resources to look at. Example, I thought it was important that Ward 28 also have representation in city government. So as of last night's meeting, we approved 5 more individuals on boards and commissions from Ward 28. That will bring us up to a total of 14.
Well, Ward 28 and Caroline, you're Ward 9. Would it be fair to say those are two of the more politically engaged neighborhoods in the city? You get a lot more active elections, more people involved in their work. I mean, you think that's true? I mean,
I think that's probably true. I mean, I love Ward 9 because it's 2 neighborhoods.
East Rock and Fairhaven.
Part East Rock, part Fairhaven.
Has it gotten more Fairhaven over time, every 10 years?
I think a little bit more. I think it's just actually adjusted over the years. At times, I think it's been half and half, and then it's adjusted a little bit more. But right now, it's about half and half.
So when I watch, you've had one term, it's been very busy. I feel like it's been a few years worth of community campaigns you've gone through. Why did you want to run again? How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I feel really excited. I mean, you know my story. I've been in New Haven now since I was 17, so about 15 years, about half my life, where I fell in love with your home city, Alder Hogan. And I think that love and public service are completely intertwined for me. And this is my home. I want to be in New Haven for the rest of my life. And I think there's so many
I made a similar decision back in the day.
Exactly.
It gets in you, you don't leave.
Might resonate with someone here. Exactly. And I think that there's a lot of different ways to serve. And I've been really privileged over the last 15 years to find different ways to serve. And this is one really purposeful and meaningful way. And I've learned so much from my neighbors, from my colleagues in the last couple of years, and excited to just continue to be.
And I remember talking to people been Alder and said, like, why do you go to these long meetings? Because I can never be in Alder because you have to sit those long meetings so many hours at night, and they say, there's no other place in New Haven they felt where people from so many different backgrounds who are really connected to the community go in a room together. Yeah. And they feel like it's New Haven. You get to experience what it's to be part of New Haven and help make decisions together. Which is not because the two of you, Caroline and Gary, you've always been both very involved in community organizing. Like you do stuff in your neighborhood. There needs to be a cleanup. If there needs to be, an overpass project to paint it or get people more connected, or you guys get people together. And that's one view of Alder. Historically, and this isn't true anymore, I think, it used to be seen that neighborhoods that were better off financially, they elected alders, saw themselves more as legislators and looked at the big issues. There were exceptions, like New Hallville's Chuck Allen was one of the also big look at the city issues stuff. Whereas other alders, because there's so many of them and one alder can't usually sway a big citywide decision, would be focused so much more often on constituent service or neighbor, getting people on boards and commissions from their neighborhood. Do you see any dynamic like that? Like how do you navigate the two aspects of the job, which is sort of to be the neighborhood organizer, neighborhood rep, looking at the interests of your ward, and you do have a responsibility, the way Congress does, of looking at the big picture. Have you encountered that at all? Thought about that?
3 initial thoughts come to mind, and Alder Hogan, I'm really curious your thoughts. One, ideally that, in this role, we're able to do both really effectively. I think that you're an advocate for your neighbors. We probably know every single sidewalk crack, every single street, most, neighbors in our ward, which is so powerful. I think that's something that's such a positive part of having 30 of us, is that ostensibly any neighbor can reach out to their alder and be able to sit down and have a 30-minute, 1 hour or longer conversation. I think that's a really special thing. But ideally, we're also able to influence citywide policy. And I think I've been able to find that through collaboration. So, again, it's such a privilege to be represent both East Rock and Fairhaven. As Fairhaven alders, we've been able to collaborate on a whole suite of issues, as well as with my East Rock colleagues. And I think through those moments of collaboration, I think we've been able to be even more thoughtful and potentially some influential around citywide issues.
Well, Gary, you and I were talking, Gary, back in the day, how politics in the city, the Barberi era and stuff, and Vincent Morris Sr., and how in those days, it's so important your constituents, you get that sidewalk fixed. It's so important your constituents that you get the extra cop on the beat to cut crime, that you get a job for somebody or get them on a commission. Often that used to be dangled, that if you want that, you're going to have to vote on the citywide issue in a way that the people running the party want you to, even if that's not necessarily what's best for the city or the constituents. You watched that from afar back in the day. Is that still the way it looks to you or another board?
No, not at all. I think you have to vote based on what's presented to you.
But I'm thinking of the famous story. I forget what the citywide issue was, and there was a 14th Ward alder who didn't vote the way that Vincent Morris Sr. wanted to. The next day, the cop was pulled from that district, and there was a crime wave.
I think politics are different than under Arthur Barberi now. I think that there's more of a collaboration between alders and their neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods, more dictating what their needs are. Hence the long meetings with public hearings. You get to hear from our residents what really is a concern. You take that, internalize that, and look at what's happening in your ward and say, okay, we've got that okay in our ward, but let me see what I can do to help the rest of the city. That's where I see alders like Alder Smith and others that kind of collaborate with each other and myself to use the resources we have to make better improvements. Yeah, we have an overall budget that we have to look at, but we also are fine-tuning, what departments are doing, what kind of work, what delivery of services those are. I don't think that there's a leader like we use the Arthur Barberi storyline that does that or has
or
that,
Vincent Morris Sr.
or
what
more,
about?
Yeah.
But what about Unite Here? Unite Here is they have the most campaign workers, right? They have a slate that usually wins most of the elections. Is there a sense ever that there's an agenda you need to vote for in order to
Well,
get
based
what
on
you
your
need?
example, Unite CT I'm sorry, New Haven Rising does not have the ability to pull a police officer from a neighborhood or add a patrol cop or add
But they
police
can,
department.
right? And I'm not saying it works that way with police officers, but there
Okay.
definitely is a connection between the city government, the mayoral administration, and the Unite here in New Haven Rising. I mean, right?
I guess what comes to mind for me is I'd be curious, Alder Hogan's thoughts. One of the biggest, it's sort of by having 30 alders, I think one of the biggest risks is that some of the issues that we focus on affect everybody. I mean, even just a street, right? I mean, whether it's Orange Street or Willow Street, there are these major streets that cut across multiple alders. And so I think that what it behooves us to definitely advocate for our specific neighbors, but I want speed bumps on Mitchell Drive. The Alderfest has been advocating for those for 10 plus years, and they should get speed bumps because it's the largest high school in the entire city.
Yeah.
And so, I also have plenty of streets that I'm excited to have speed bumps and excited to have improvements. But I think it's really important for us to, if there are going to be 30 alders and we're going to have that high touch value that's so valuable, then we need to make sure that we're also thinking about things more holistically, especially when it comes to shared assets like our infrastructure and like our streets.
You know what's interesting? Not everybody likes this. I thought the greatest improvement in that area was about 10 years ago, I think it was, when there was a committee formed to decide where street improvements, who's going to get new sidewalks and street improvements, and each alder got from each neighborhood to put in their request to make it a little more scientific. But have you ever thought? So I even think of how you're right, Caroline. I hadn't thought about this. The way sometimes that ward level street decision can be a citywide decision. I'm thinking about the debate over right near the airport where someone wanted a residential parking zone because they're upset about airport parking a block away. And I think it has to go before you. It went before the zoning board first, where they said, even though they voted for it, they said, because that's what the neighbors want, right? And Alder was there wanting it. But somebody else, Leslie Ratcliffe on the board, said, well, everyone in that neighborhood has huge driveways that have 4 parking places. So in fact, they don't need to park on the street. So if you put a residential parking zone there, that's going to hurt other neighborhoods because we have a limited number of citywide inspectors to enforce residential parking zones. So that doesn't help the city. And then other people said, but if we represent that neighborhood, we need to do what the neighbors want. Isn't that fun? I mean, that's fun.
Such is the trade-off of
Yeah.
politics.
Yeah. Can you guys think of a time where you had a decision that you thought, honestly, and this has nothing to do with anyone doing anything wrong at all, remotely, where you felt like, well, this might be better for what my constituents want in my neighborhood. This might be better for the city. Have you faced anything like that?
Yes, I have. By the field house, that Crescent, Sherman, Winthrop Avenue area, they wanted residential parking because what happens on weekends and evening events, others take the parking spaces. In a very strong conversation, I also pointed out the negative side of the residential parking. So if your cousins visit on a long weekend and the inspector comes by, they will get a ticket because they don't have a permit. Also, you will not enjoy the fact that when people park illegally and they're not being ticketed, that's going to raise your angst to say, why didn't they come do something about it? So let's think more holistically about what are we asking and when does it actually occur? So that kind of staved the wave of anger. But if you go by the field house on a on a Hill House basketball night, no problem. If there's a home show or some kind of expo, it's a different occasion. So giving residents ample notice and letting them hear what's going to happen, then they're more likely to stay.
I know Brittany's in that level too, where sometimes a big part of your job is people get upset about stuff and you're there to explain and then to bring the police chief or the head of traffic and parking into their neighborhood to talk to them. That's kind of a nice role. We're talking to Gary Hogan and Caroline Tanbee Smith. They're finishing up their first terms as alder, and they're running for a second term. And they're already starting on that. Could I ask each of you to tell me some of your highlights of your first term, what you're proudest, and also something that might have surprised you that didn't work out the way you thought you learned from?
Oh, the first thing for me was the community involvement. The residents of Beaver Hills that wanted me to become alder, and the love and attention and the nice, kind words and walking with me in the sense of community was really helpful. That led to us.
Frankie Redente says, 2 of my favorite people, 2 exclamation points. Thanks for listening, Frankie. Frank Redente writes in, 2 of my favorite people, exclamation points. Thanks for writing in, Frankie.
the relationships of building the community with the police department, traffic and parking, engineering, putting resources together for those that always had those questions that never knew how to
What would
get
be
them
example
answered.
of resources?
Crime was up. We invited the police chief to Ward 28. He came twice. We invited the mayor. He came. The community got a chance to hear directly from the leaders of the city. And then from behind scenes, then that's where I come in and say, listen, these are the things we want, these are the things we need. Another sense of resources are our web, our Whaley, Edgewood, Beaver Hills web is very engaged in a variety of different
Community
activities.
magic and team, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know partly was the Kia Boys phenomenon, even though it wasn't always Kia Boys, people stealing the cars. I know that's tapered off. That was a tough one.
You know, I got away from calling them Kia Boys. They're car thieves.
Yeah.
They're basically car thieves. They got a nickname for Kia Boys, but basically they are car thieves. Having that subdued substantially in the neighborhood makes my Orthodox community feel safer walking on Saturdays.
Mm-hmm. And Caroline, it's kind of hard to keep track of all the stuff you've been involved in because you have a weekly newsletter that's sort of one of my main news sources in New Haven. I'm totally serious. Like when I know some good things that are happening in New Haven, I read that every day. I don't read the Spanish language, but English language part. And I just noticed some things you've covered. I mean, you had the Iris, the refugee settlement place. You got how many hundred people to sign up as volunteers?
A little over 250.
That's amazing. They've been trained to respond to the Trump stuff. You had I-91 Neighborhood Reconnection Initiative. When you work with a lot of people that get state money to try to reconnect those neighborhoods. You did the Lawrence C. Plaza. You scored bikes for East Rock School. You recruited a Willow Street Crossing Guard. You had sidewalk and pothole street lamp fixes. You had Bike Week. What am I missing in terms of your highlight? What was your moment that you said, this is why I do it?
First of all, I think that's just a testament to, something I say a lot is, part of my kind of core theory of change is how do we bring a lot of people together to get things done. And part of that is because it takes a lot of people to get something big done. And also because I think getting involved for me has given me such a sense of purpose, and it just wakes me up in the morning. And I think it's a time where we need to create as many avenues for people to feel purposeful and meaningful in their lives. And I think that on a local government level, we have such a privilege to be able to build those kinds of bridges.
And this is seeing how much that's talked nationally, whether it's Chris Murphy talking about the web or people talking how you reach the disaffected voters, that there is this sense of atomization of society with technology and political polarization that people don't feel, and the declining church membership, everything, they don't feel there's something they can do or they feel part of something and that it matters. Do you feel as Alders that you might have this great role in society of helping people have those opportunities? And
yeah, I think it's part of the role of an alder is to engage and create these conversations where people feel included. In like Ward 28, we have what I call the West Side, which is more of a middle class neighborhood than when you get on the East Side, which is poorer neighborhood, and both suffer from the same thing: high electric bills, for being able to sustain themselves.
Bodie Sedman, who was an alder in Ward 28, once drove constituents to a PUC hearing to talk about electric bills. That was always a word you're.
Yeah,
that's getting more into my platform for what I'd like to do in the next term. I think that we have to include our constituents in these conversations. Feeling included is what brings out more voters, more community interest, and probably better results.
Yeah, and when you see Caroline's, it's usually not about Caroline. It's usually about which people showed up that week to do something, which is really lovely. So you tell me about this neighborhood I-91 Reconnection Initiative. What was the idea and what was brought to fruition and how?
Yeah, when you had asked the question about highlights of the term, that's one that definitely stands out. And it's emotional for me because, when I first came here, the history of the highways just felt so present in the city. And, every city has a number of different stories that kind of are part of its underbelly. And I think highways is one for New Haven as a model city. And of course I felt it in such a present way in the ward because I-91 cuts through East Rock and Fairhaven. There's 4 underpasses in the ward alone. In addition, when I got the police reports, I requested the police to give me, at the beginning of my term, all the motor vehicle crashes. And just to kind of get a sense of, from a data-driven perspective, what are the hot spots in the areas and how can it beget a set of priorities? And it was, it's Mitchell and Willow, it's James and Grand, it's State and Humphrey, it's Willow and State. It's the areas and the intersections in and around the highway where people are speeding off to get to work or speeding off to get home. And so I think a combination of seeing that, and traffic safety was one of the number one issues I heard when I was knocking on doors, as well as this story of pain in our city. It made me think, okay, that this is an issue we can really tackle here. Also, I've been working with J.R. Logan and Ben Berkowitz, who have been huge champions for the Mill River Trail, to take a look at this area behind the Ralph Walker Hockey Rink, this large area, and see, can we, like other cities, turn this into a park that reconnects East Rock and Fairhaven? And so these series of conversations and data then beget, hey, maybe now is the moment in the city. This is a 10-year, 15-year quest, but to really think about I-91. And so really called Director Piscatelli and
economic development. Yeah.
Economic development. And, the Biden administration had put out a federal grant around reconnecting communities, really getting to the heart of this very issue. And we applied and we got $2 million.
To do what?
It's a planning grant to focus on all of I-91 and in New Haven.
Meaning what? Like getting rid of highway bridges or redesigning? It's
sort of three things. One is traffic safety. So looking at those intersections in and around the highway, how do we make them better for pedestrians, drivers, cyclists?
That'd be nice.
Two is looking at underpasses and thinking, how do we turn these from areas of neglect to assets? And three, this is the most, I think, visionary piece, is taking a look at some of the highway exits and seeing, do we need all of them? What would it mean if we were to think about them in a different way? Could that unlock land for housing? Could that make
and
that
is the
area
best
safer?
example the Humphrey?
Exit 3. That's right. Oh, Exit 3, Trumbull.
Oh, Exit 3, Trumbull.
Mm-hmm. Exit 3
and
would
that's
be,
a monster.
It's a monster. It's
like
a monster.
Trying to cross there is
obviously,
so tough.
it would take a lot of planning. That's what this whole grant is for, planning and community engagement.
Then it's a lot of money to redo an exit.
It would take a lot of time, but it takes us first step, and this is a $2 million
and big
first
vision
step.
is really important.
Yeah, that's right.
And did we get the money, or did Trump kill it?
That's a good question. I think time will tell. Still, the money is we should receive the money, but obviously every day is evolving. And I think for the Alders and for the city, we still have a commitment to seeing the project through, and hopefully we'll continue to have the $2 million that's obligated to the city.
Well, Gary, we talked before in the air about how your parents, Ted and Jean, were civic leaders for decades and decades in the 60s and 70s and 80s mostly, right? A little bit 90s, right? And they
a little bit of 90s.
And they watched a different period in our history when people who were sort of visionary and young and smart, like Caroline Smith, thought the opposite of what they think today. And they created all these problems we're trying to fix. We wanted a city where we thought we were going to compete with the suburbs by being like the suburbs and having these highways and going fast. And now we're trying to undo it. We've already started. It's one of my favorite projects on State Street, making it a place where you can walk and bike.
You see how long it took them to do Route 34.
Yeah. And then they didn't finish. But what's so interesting to me when I think about that? So what Caroline was just talking about, rethinking our highways, is the next step after what we've done on State Street. And I remember in our lifetime, when you and I were adults, they did the opposite on State Street. In the 80s, they made it a highway to try to make it like corporate headquarters going in forward. Do you ever think back to your parents and think, do we need some humility now to think, what if we're wrong again? Or is it still important to think what's the best idea at the moment and run with it because we're human beings and that's how
I
society.
just think that's politics. Let's go with the best idea at the moment because somebody thought it up. And I applaud Alder Smith for what she's doing over in her ward, because if I had a highway with all the people that walk their dogs, ride scooters, cyclists, and these high-speed scooters nowadays, I would be concerned about cars speeding off the highway as well. But I tend to think that politics leads decision-making that's not always in the best interest. What I mean by that is sometimes, these speed humps.
Well, the other night a woman died at a speed bump.
Yeah.
And I don't know if speed bumps fault.
We just installed 3 speed humps on a secondary road in my ward, and they're so close together. The neighborhood wanted them. When they were installed, they realized, wait, an emergency vehicle has to go over each one of them slow. 1, 2, 3. And by the time they get to their destination, which could be a life or death situation, it's because we installed speed humps. Never thought of that one. That was the neighborhood chat with the discussions on.
So what do we do?
Plan better, to be honest with you. Plan better.
Well, there's something about planning that always takes some humility, but I would still argue that we shouldn't try to strive for what we think is the best idea, that we just be a good listener. Like, I've watched that with Caroline. She's a great listener, and I won't reveal any identities or anything, but I was on Stacy with Caroline one day with a guy who's very active in New Haven, but doesn't live here, right? Comes in from the suburbs. just started hauling off on her, even though she had nothing to do with it, about the changes to State Street, so you can't come from, we'll name the shoreline, and just zoom through past everybody to go collect some business, make money in New Haven, and leave. And Caroline didn't argue; she listened, And for him, he just couldn't understand. He came from that era where it was done so that people like him could come into New Haven, do business, to come out. And like I listened to that, I was thinking that's kind of the way to do it. You do have to hear what everybody has to say, but I'm still glad we stick to our guns and say we're gonna create a neighborhood based on what we're hearing from the people who live here the best way.
It's important that we give constructive feedback.
But as you said, there was unintended consequences like the speed bumps. I still want to do speed bumps, but we kind of always have to learn, because even though you're right that politics comes into decision making, I would still argue that the way we made New Haven in the 60s, we didn't listen enough to the people who lived there. And obviously you guys are listening, people who live there. But we also did believe it was a good idea. We didn't think about a lot of unintended consequences when we tore down ghettos, but then people had nowhere to go.
You have cameras everywhere. You have different agencies that have cameras. I just noticed a couple of intersections in Ward 28 that had black cameras, not large white ones, that were up on the pole that went in 5 different directions. I'm like, okay, those are not the red light cameras. That's
the Elon Musk. Yeah.
Huh?
Oh, no, that's the Neuralink. He's in our brain already. I'm trying to keep up with who's got what camera
But,
where.
those lead to questions that your community asks, like, who put the cameras here? And then you have to delve into a little bit more. And the pushback is, well, what are you really watching? Is it a reduction in crime? Are you watching the activities? Are you watching behaviors? Are you watching traffic? Are you watching kids? What are you really monitoring when they're not traffic related cameras?
Yeah. We're talking to Gary Hogan and Caroline Tanbee Smith, 2 first-term Alders running for a second term and running strong. You just got done with a budget. That was your first budget, your second one. What did you take from that? It really wasn't controversial. Even though taxes were raised like 2-something%, doesn't bug me if I feel like government's working right, because I feel like costs go up and we do want to pay people. But there are a lot of things we want to do we couldn't do. What did you take away? Why wasn't this controversial? I know how much work you did. I saw Caroline had people involved with every step of the budget process explaining. What did you take away from that about the budget process, how it works, your role in the community?
It's a good question. So I guess two buckets come to mind, and the second bucket is actually some questions. I'm still thinking about it, right? Because we have our special meeting next Tuesday. Something that was important to me, as you mentioned, was just reducing the barriers to residents understanding the budget. It's this 400-page document, and I think it's the most important document in the city.
And you really went through it, right? Didn't you even study it? What did you learn that you didn't know about city budgets?
A few things. So one is, a portion of the budget that I'm pretty fascinated by is actually just 4% of the budget, which is our permits, fines, and fees. Because I think, obviously that portion is about revenue, but it's really our section about behavior change and how we think about behavior change and how we think about what do we want to encourage and what do we want to discourage.
Like these new school bus cameras.
Like school bus cameras, working on some other things. But I've been pretty interested in that section. For example, as you know, Paul, I've been pretty fascinated about the permitting process for small businesses. That's my background is supporting small businesses. And, some cities have played around with the fees to encourage various kinds of behavior and also support businesses. I paid particular attention to the catering license fee, which our catering license fee is around $650 for the first year, $550 for subsequent years. It's about double the amount of the average of most cities. Hartford's, for example, is $250 a year. And so something I've been teasing through and through conversations with entrepreneurs and other alders is, what if we were to do a program like the First Year Free, where we reduce it for the first year, encourage more small business growth, and support especially those early stage entrepreneurs.
Which big talk now with communal kitchens and things like that. Right?
That's right, exactly. Anyways, all just to say, I think that section of the budget's really interesting because, of course, it's about revenue, but it's also about what do we want to see more of. And what do we want to see?
So, what did you do based on that interest in this particular issue?
Well, I'm curious if that's something we can move forward. So, we this past year we had 2 listening sessions with entrepreneurs in partnership with the city. One thing that came out of those sessions was just an affirmation that the permitting process could use some work, could be more streamlined.
Yes, we've heard
the city,
to
give them a lot of credit, they created as a result the permitting roundtable. So this is something that entrepreneurs can sign up for, kind of like office hours. So if they have questions, instead of just scrolling through, endless PDFs, they can reach out to the city and talk to the various departments involved and make sure that they get their questions answered to move things along in the process. I think the second piece is now fiddling around with some of our rules. Can we make it easier?
Are you going to do that in this budget before next week?
Potentially, but probably more in the future, just because of timing. But
so in other words, you're going to vote this year to keep it the same, but you have your eye on next year.
Eye on next year for
to maybe do a first year free.
Something like that, or certainly having parity with other cities, so that we again encourage businesses. I mean, New Haven punches above its weight in terms of individuals who want to start something. How do we encourage that as much as we can, and potentially actually beget more revenue growth by them being able to be more successful and kind of get their feet on the ground?
How about what struck you in the budget process?
Wow, she said that so eloquently. I don't know if I should say anything after that.
I know it's a little daunting. Yeah.
I think the budget is the blueprint of what our future is and what direction we're going in. And I've been focusing more on the not-for-profit agencies that provide services to young people in Elders, and seeing the mayor's budget and then talking with finance members, really pushing that we can up those numbers a little bit so that we can provide services.
In other words, have more public funding for nonprofits. It often came through block grants, correct?
Yeah, they did.
So what did you do in this year's budget? How did it come up? What did you notice?
I'm going to be making further recommendations next week. It's kind of hard and to say what we did thus far, because next week's meeting is really where I get to ask my questions.
Is it too late? Is next week when you're voting on the budget? So was that Monday or Tuesday?
Next Tuesday.
Tuesday.
So is there time to move money around?
Oh, absolutely.
So what are you going to be looking to move? How much are you going to be looking to move where?
I'm meeting with a couple other Alders on Thursday just to make sure that the numbers that I'd like to see actually get.
Are you talking about increased support for nonprofits that help kids and elderly?
Yes.
What kind of dollar figure you have in mind, and where would you find the money?
Well, there was some proposed that we're only going to get $15,000 a year.
For what?
Beg your pardon?
What's going to get 15,000?
15,000. There were some proposed agencies. I don't want to say the agency's name out there because I don't want to throw them on.
But they used to get more.
But they need to get more. Let me give another example. Stetson Library, who the Elks have helped fund with some programs, only gets $3,000 a year for budgeting programming. That's not a lot for a library. Not that I can change that in this year's budget, but going forward, libraries seem to be the only place where there's a sense of community, any age.
And it's so interesting how they've evolved since we were kids. They've really become social centers.
But when you go to a library on a Saturday, you see 25 kids, and you're wondering, well, how do you pay for this? And let's look at it like
the space is pretty remarkable.
That feeds individuals. That so there's a lot to this.
So let's talk more about the libraries. Did the other branch libraries like Wilson Branch also get only the $3,000 for programming?
Yeah, it's my understanding from director that that's pretty much what's allotted to all.
So not this year, but like Caroline, for next year, if you're reelected, you have your eye on increasing that money. Like this year, you want to get nonprofit money, and next year you got your eye on library staffing.
It's a safe space for people.
And we noticed that, remember when Joanna was killed, the teenage girl near the old Stetson branch, and there was no more Q House, and that was the place where everybody gathered and got support and had their events, and that was.
So the budget is awesome, daunting, kind of hard to feel as a 6-month alder, who has what powers over where. So it's like the first 6 months for me is I'm learning.
You guys are learning. You're learning fast.
And learning.
So one thing is, it's just me always is the school budget, because as alders, the only chance you have to affect the schools financially is once a year, correct? You get to vote on New Haven's contribution to the school budget, which has other sources too, a lot more state money and federal, but you also can hold hearing on issues. There's a lot of talk about all the teachers are going to be laid off. I don't have a full understanding of why the schools are facing this total deficit, in addition to reasons such as the decline of pandemic relief money that we relied on for much years. When you looked at the school budget, what did you conclude you could and couldn't do and wanted to do?
Yeah, you had asked maybe earlier on in the conversation, sort of what's one of the biggest issues of right now, and I think it's education. I think for the city and for the state, I think it's one of the most important issues we should be talking about, and it feels like the moment from many different institutions and partners for a historic investment in our schools. So
you think it's a money issue?
I think it's both. I think that they're. One of the questions that I'm teasing through is, can we provide more money to the schools? I think that, I think it's worth potentially an investigation to look at the numbers to see if our investment in the schools has kept track with inflation. I think there's reason to say there is, and so we should continue to contribute.
So is that again a next year issue? It's kind of too late for this year.
I think it's still on the. I would say it's still on the table. I'm curious about even a question. Again, this is something I'm not sure of yet. But when we think about the $1.4 million that might go into a reserve, could some portion of that go to schools? I mean,
So you might look at that over the next week.
I'm curious about that. I think it's a question worth asking. I mean, we especially if there are commitments by the schools that would go towards student-facing staff and teachers.
This thing I haven't noticed, I could be wrong, the kind of controversies we had over different periods, John Dow period, the Carol Brooks period, over personalities in the school system. And also there were some very substantive issues that Alders were involved in addressing in the way schools conducted education, especially reading methods. There were hearings in the schools, and that changed. We're on a page now. Pandemic, there were issues. Do you open or close? Am I right that maybe the big issues you're going to be looking at now aren't as much about debates over how education is conducted as opposed to if there's enough money for it?
Yeah, I would think that it comes down to dollars. And from my perspective, there's a lot I don't know which causes these costs. Well,
everyone always says cut the administrators. Yeah, I always say, tell me who they are. Yeah, because sometimes it's an administrator who there's a federal grant, and to have the grant, you have to have this grant paid position that monitors the grant spent well. So you got to have that person, right? I never really hear out of sight except the broad brush of assistant principals who actually are kind of needed in some ways. Have you guys ever gotten a good list of more than one administrator who could be eliminated in any kind of meaningful budget way to deal with?
Over the last 25, 30 years, that's been the solver of all problems, is to let people go. But we always seem to be kicking this debt.
I just never get the examples. When everyone always says you got to cut the fat administrators, I've been like always scratching my head. Who are these people? Do you have any sense? Do we have an administrator problem?
I mean, I think zooming out, what's frustrating about this conversation is we should have a budget for schools that's fully funded so that we don't have to make these impossible choices between a director of reading and 3 to 4 additional teachers for students. We shouldn't have to make that choice. And I think that's why the state level conversation around the ECS formula, which hasn't been changed,
educational costs at the state,
is so important. Because I think there's other school districts that don't have to make those tough choices, that don't have to tease through the line items of an administrator, and instead are able to fund both so that we can support our students. Because probably the reality is both are needed.
But I always thought is that in some of those positions, you actually wouldn't get the teacher positions because they're grant funded, and the grant includes monitoring the grant or overseeing the grant, correct? You get a federal teacher. Okay, right. Gary Hogan, Caroline Tanbee Smith, tell me about your next term. You've already started talking a little bit about Caroline. You're talking about permitting and culinary kitchens. Gary, you're talking about funding for nonprofits and library hours. What are some other goals you have? And by the way, do you have opponents?
Not as of yet.
Yeah, not as of yet.
I have a feeling you guys
officially announced it either, though. But
are you running again?
Yes.
All right, the scoop on Dateline New Haven. Gary Hogan's 6 months in. He's going for 2 years of more punishment. So if you are elected in a nail-biting race, what will you do in the next term?
One, I will continue to build community capacity within my community, my Ward 28. The other thing is I'm really focusing on what I call my building an affordability committee within my ward that addresses taxes, utilities, insurances. I have an aging population on the west side of my ward where they're all kind of getting to be my age, retired, living on a fixed income, and utility costs are going up. With that, many of us have moved solar. Many of us have tried to figure out how to reduce our insurance.
So you're going to form a committee looking at cost of living for especially older people.
Absolutely.
And what will this committee do?
Identify resources. A resource can be individuals over 65 that are on a fixed income, that own a home, that may be able to reduce their taxes, may be able to reduce their insurance. Insurance is connected to when you have the car thieves running around the neighborhood. That impacts your overall. So
will you be looking at policy changes or individual help for people?
I'm looking at
both?
Legislation. I'm looking at opportunities for energy other than UI costs.
I still always want us to have a co-op like Wallingford. The most Rockridge Republican municipality in Connecticut has had for decades a cooperatively owned municipal power plant, goes down the least and costs the least. Just throwing that in for ideological purposes. Gary, what about the Whaley Jail? There's a lot of talk about moving it. Where are you going to be on that?
There's not enough information. Right now, there are 699 inmates there, 5 of which are already sentenced. The other 694 inmates there are awaiting sentencing. You have 267 employees there who all shop in Ward 28. Edge of the Woods is down the street. They Uber food there. They're contributing to my Ward 28, Ward 24, Ward 27.
And what's the downside of the prison?
The downside of prison? I'm not quite sure that there is a downside that impacts the neighborhood as of yet.
So it sounds like you're not hungry for having
where do families go to visit their family members that are.
So it sounds like you're not hungry for it to leave and just have a big empty building.
I just need more information to make that decision. It's been there since 1868. I mean,
wow. And somebody did like escape once in 1970. I know.
You had a guy escape from the state police. Maybe a month ago, but he got caught. I mean, it's far different. But I base my opinion on the data that is presented on what.
And what about the Gulf Street Armory? We've been around and around and around. We've had talking. I want one at Caroline's Culinary Kitchens in there.
It has so many opportunities. There's opportunities for vocational stuff. I'd love to see us have an affordable child care center there. With having a granddaughter that is 18 months, at some point my son's gonna have to pay child care services. He can't afford to pay $1,000 a week. So it'd be nice to have an opportunity for folks that have even less resources than the Hogans do. So,
and you were concerned as well about composting. The city's going to be having composting bins. You're worried about animals breaking in. Did they satisfy you?
I'm in favor of composting.
Yeah, I know you're worried about the bags.
I just didn't like when my neighbors had the bins that were left unkept.
My neighbors don't always happy because sometimes.
So now there's a group that comes through the neighborhood that has little green containers. But so composting, look at it holistic. Composting reduces trash. Recycling reduces trash. Trash loads reduce the costs over at DPW. That way we can provide other services and
there's gardens too that get good soil.
So
I mean, you appreciate to convert it here, yeah. But it seemed like there was an issue that the city's going to make sure to give you bins so that the animals don't get in.
To be determined.
Okay, you'll be making sure they do.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
All right. And Caroline, what were some of your plans? We talked about the fees for catering.
Yep. I think the broad sort of spine is that I'm a big believer in government. I want, and I really envision New Haven to be a model for government that's a visible and effective and
government
trusted.
Is we, not they.
Yeah, the we of government, exactly. The we of government as a visible and effective and trusted force for good in people's lives. And so I want to focus on those tenets. So the visibility, you mentioned the newsletter. I think that I get excited about government legislators like telling the story of what we're doing, so that individuals can have a pathway to be engaged. So it's continuing with the communications, newsletter, Instagram reels I've been exploring.
I like those. Those are good.
Those have been fun. And then
do you follow any Donnie, the guy running for mayor in New York?
Oh yes, yeah.
He's the best, maybe the best Instagram reels in the country of any politician.
Mayor Michelle was great. Yeah, there's some individuals who are really.
And you'll be following up on the I-91 project for sure.
Following up the I-91 Neighborhood Reconnection Initiative project. On the policy side, it's working on issues that neighbors bring up. So something that we're working on is right now. There are some quality of life issues around zoning violations. So whether it's a business that's open too late or illegal motor repair that happens in people's backyards. And, right now we can send a letter of a cease and desist, but we actually can, by state statute, provide also a $150 fine. But we just haven't unlocked our ability to do that. So unlocking that ability, because right now we, as Fairhaven Alders and departments, meet every 2 weeks to talk about a variety of Fairhaven issues. And this one of these zoning violations kept coming up over and over again. And so can we add an additional tool in our tool belt? Same on the permitting side. I'm curious also about some of our public spaces. How do we make it easier for people to utilize park spaces, utilize, some of our pavilions? And I think the secret sauce of New Haven is that people love this place. They want to be active. People want to create events and they want to create festivals. And I think that's our competitive advantage. How do we make it easier? How do we make government an entity that's easy to navigate so that people can do good in their neighborhoods? And
my Debbie Downer question is Trump. How are we bracing for the city to deal with some of the pressures from Washington and rolling with that immigration? Will we have our lawsuit to try to not have money withheld for stuff that doesn't involve immigration because we're considered a sanctuary city? What's your guys thinking on your next term if reelected and dealing with the Trump challenges?
It's, it makes me emotional to think about it. I think I've been so proud I've been very proud of New Haven.
Me
You know,
too.
I think about that moment when those anti-immigrant flyers were spread across the East Rock neighborhood, and kids and neighbors picked them up and threw them away. And we also see that at scale. I mean, the New Haven Immigrants Coalition is a group of numerous organizations, numerous leaders in coordination with the city, you know, working to protect neighbors. I don't see a world in which, you know, we bury our heads in the sand over the next 4 years. I think we have to stand by our values, be proud, be thoughtful, be strategic, but ultimately, I think be proud of the values that New Haven's had for decades.
Gary?
Yeah, it's scary times, but New Haven is very resilient, and I think with us putting our heads together, creatively thinking of ways to thwart the impacts to our city, work collectively, communicate effectively as well, that we'll be able to survive this presidency.
And the last question I want to ask you, I just want to see if I guessed right. I wrote down my answers. Name me a political figure who's a hero for you or a role model for what you want to accomplish. I'll see if I wrote it down right.
Wow, that's a tough one because I've been influenced by so many different political figures, and they've all been,
civic figures.
They've all been kind of local, but you know,
my guy's the former president of Uruguay, but he supplanted Lula for me.
Jeez, see, because I don't look at national leaders. I look at folks that
Could be local, definitely.
impact my neighborhood.
So anyone popped to your head?
Yeah,
So-
I mean, and you know, I gotta say this. You know, I always loved the work Rosa does for our city and for our country. I mean, some
Good
folks
answer.
disagree
Rosa
with me. I
Delano.
loved what John DeStefano did with the school system, rebuilding all the schools. There's a lot. I mean, I can name numerous.
Those are
Alders.
good answers. How about you, Caroline?
Three
Yeah.
quick ones. One, Mayor Michelle Wu.
I know that was my
hero.
guess. Yeah.
I knew those were guess. Two, Ben Franklin, the ultimate civic entrepreneur. You know,
Did
the
you say
library.
Ben Franklin?
Ben Franklin, yeah.
Okay.
The fire department, the library. He was a believer in civic institutions.
And New Haven's
Um,
first daily newspaper.
Exactly. And then three, Alder Gary Hogan.
All right. Okay. Well, my heroes include Alders of the city of New Haven. You guys get like this little stipend. You don't get paid. You were right on the front lines where people are caring about. You listen to everybody. You try to do the best to make our city a better place. And I feel like keep it going. I feel lucky that you guys are running again and take it to the next level.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for being on Dateline New Haven, Gary Hogan and Caroline Tanbee Smith.
Thank you,
Running
Paul, for having us.
Running for, and I thought you were going to say Gene and Ted Hogan, for Ward 28 and Ward 9.
I live them. They're here.
We're going to, thanks to Harry Droz behind the controls. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long on WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.